Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to AP European History Live. It's Monday, start of a fresh week. It's DBQ Feedback Day. That's going to be exciting. My name is Todd Beach. I teach AP European History at Eastview High School in Apple Valley, Minnesota. That's a suburb of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And this is Katie.
Good morning. Happy Monday. I'm Katie Lancey. I teach at Coral Gables Senior High, which is in Coral Gables, Florida, also a suburb of Miami. We're really excited to go over some of these excellent document-based questions that you gave us today. Thank you, as always, for all the amazing feedback that you keep giving us. We appreciate it. As we look really quickly today, I just want to share this slide with you. So as we move forward, you're able to take a look and see what we're planning on covering during the course of the week. And want to highlight again that at the end of the week, we will be looking at another full DBQ practice on Friday. So you can always come back to that. So today we are going to cover very quickly the Columbian exchange, the slave trade, and the commercial revolution. And we'll be explaining the economic impact for these. We'll be looking at causation for the slave trade and commercial and agricultural developments, doing all of the skills you see here and focusing on the reasoning development for causation today.
Okay, this is our warm-up. So we left you on Friday with a DBQ for practice, and we received many submissions, and submissions were still coming in this morning as I was checking. So well over 100 of you have submitted full DBQs and full essays and all asking for feedback. And so if you're tuning in today and you were not with us on Friday, you can go to last Friday's video. And in the video, if you click in the description underneath the video on YouTube page, you can get the DBQ that people wrote and a one-page rubric. You can still practice that on your own. It's good practice. Okay, so we'll get straight into the warm-up then. Oh, also, stay right there. Thank you, Katie. So you're going to watch video number 13. And if you are interested in how we did the structure, we broke down the structure in this diagram. And so you can fast forward to 34:45 in the video and kind of hear our explanation in that diagram and the essay structure. So we'll go straight into, there we are. This first response, we're looking at contextualization and thesis paragraph. So we're going to give you part by part the entire essay today. This is a response from Sophie in Neuqua Valley High School in Illinois. And she does earn the point for contextualization. She is going to earn the point for thesis. I'm going to quickly read through the contextualization piece. I thought Sophie did a great job. 16th century is marked up by religious disputes and political instability. Leading up to the 16th century, monarchs limited nobles' power in government in an attempt to consolidate their power, which led to tension between the nobles and monarchy. These strained political relations only served to magnify the religious problems going on at the time. The beginning of the 16th century saw the birth of Protestantism, which led to many new forms of Christianity and the decrease of the Roman Catholic Church's power. The new religious developments led to a power struggle between religion, and as a result, and here in the yellow is our thesis, European authorities did not exercise religious tolerance because monarchs wanted to keep their territory united, and popular insecurity from religious wars created fear of other religions. Really clear thesis. Sophie has used the prompt, which you see at the top of the page, to lead us right into it. Sophie has given us a because statement with two very clear arguments. It's really well done. And the context, the contextualization leading us up into that is also really well done. Okay, next slide, please. This is,
I'm sorry.
This is yours, isn't it?
Yeah, okay, I'm really sorry. I think I inadvertently deleted your other slide. I apologize for that, Todd.
No, we're good.
So let's move on. That was a great example of context and thesis. And then I want to talk for a minute before we look at some individual examples about the evidence. If you remember on this rubric just for this year, there are 5 potential points that a student can get for evidence. 3 of those points are for using the documents to support an argument. There is a low bar point that I'm not giving examples today. That first evidence point talks about using the content of the documents in regards to the topic of the prompt. But the 2 examples I'm going to show you today are examples where the student used the document to support an argument. And I want to remind you that it takes 2 documents to receive the first point for supporting an argument and 4 documents for getting that second point. So if you want to look here with me, we have, to begin, despite some advances for political stability, authorities in Europe were overall limited in practicing religious toleration in that they continued to persecute minority groups. For example, an etching shows an Anabaptist being led to her death in 1539, document 1. I really actually like that best practice of putting the document number when you're using it. That's just a personal thing that I appreciate as a reader. And then Amanda goes on to say, this image exemplifies the lack of religious tolerance that continued against minority religious groups during the 16th century. Therefore, because minority religious groups like the Anabaptists were still persecuted and killed, the degree to which European authorities exercised religious tolerance was very limited. And so Amanda has brought the use of that document and her explanation back to her argument that was that there was little toleration. So I thought that was a really great job. And that's Amanda from Vista Marietta High School in California. And then another example, what I thought was a really nice job of supporting an argument is from Delia at Massabesic High School in Maine. And this is about a different document. Sebastian Castiello argued that this immediate proclamation of heresy in any differing religious groups was tearing Christianity apart. He explained that if you differed from your neighbor in any way, you ran the risk of quickly being called a heretic. This shows how against religious tolerance officials were in the 16th century if you could not differ from their neighbors freely. So again, nice quick explanation of the document and what the document is arguing, and then brings it back to the larger argument. So a nice job for both of these, using the documents to support an argument in that C section for evidence. And then the C section also has 2 potential points for receiving outside information, evidence beyond the documents. So this is an example after using the document about the Edict of Nantes, that this is Jessica from Woodward High School in Oklahoma, wrote, limited religious toleration could be found in England under the rule of Elizabeth I at the same time. Though an Anglican, Elizabeth achieved a somewhat middle ground in England between Catholics and Protestants. So it's a nice example right after that same time of what's going on in England, a little bit of outside information. Very nice job of bringing in evidence here. And then another example from Cherie at Red Hook High School in New York. Henry of Navarre converts to Catholicism in order to avoid the backlash and to be spared from execution, saying Paris is worth a mass. This demonstrates the idea of politique, where the political interests of France were more important than religious unity. So again, this is something that is beyond the documents. The actual Edict of Nantes document doesn't have this background information, and Cherie wove that into her argument really nicely. So that was a lovely job and really good examples of bringing in outside information to bring it into your argument in the DBQ.
Those are great examples, Katie. So students, one thing I'd give you just quick advice is when we're Katie's unpacking the evidence category right there, and there are 5 possible points there. So one thing that I think would really help you as you start to internalize this new rubric is to make sure you have it out in front of you, print it if you have the ability to, have it with you. And we're going to be referring to it a lot in the next 3 weeks. So make sure you have that with you, and then that will help you internalize it as we're walking through this. So now we're looking at the D category, which is analysis and reasoning. And now there are 3 points possible in the D category. We're going to look at D1, and this is from Prachi at Novi High School in Michigan. And it's going to earn the point for sourcing because the response explains how the document's point of view is relevant to an argument about the prompt. So we've been working on sourcing since we started a couple weeks ago, and here we're applying our sourcing skill within a DBQ. So I'll read it. The reason for this persecution and mistreatment of Reformed religions can be understood through source 2. As a Protestant living in France, I've circled that because that's going to cue the reader, and I think it really helps the writer. I think it helps in the response. Castiello writes to persuade the people of his country to be more open-minded of other religions. He argues that no one would want to be Christian if they saw others harming those solely because of religion. Castiello does this to point out the widespread and intense intolerance he sees around France, and specifically what he faces as a Protestant himself. So we've talked about at the beginning where I've circled that, the reader Prachi is cueing the writer rather, is cueing us. The Protestant living in France comes back and really kind of hammers that point home. That is what we call authorial point of view. That would definitely earn the point there. So well done on that example, Prachi. This is from Angela at Westview High School in California. And this is an example of audience sourcing. So I was talking about HAP on Friday, and I realized that some of you weren't with us through some of these videos. HAP being historical situation, audience, purpose, point of view. We know that other teachers use different acronyms, and that's fine. Just for our purposes on this video, this is what I use with my students, and that's why we're using that. But it doesn't mean that HIPPO doesn't work or anything else. So here we are, audience. While it may seem that the Catholic Church is tolerant of the Lutherans are under strict binding orders in the contract. The audience of this contract between these two groups is obviously the Lutherans, as the tone of the contract is stern and almost one of disgust with the words such as hindrance, and in describing the Catholic Church chapter as well-intentioned, making the Catholic Church seem as if they are doing the Lutherans a favor out of the goodness of their hearts. So really well done by Angela, because it's explaining. It's not just identifying who the audience is, but it's going further and explaining and talking about why that's relevant to the prompt. Okay, next slide, please. This is from Sophie at Neuqua Valley High School in Illinois. And now we're looking at what would have been known before as the D2 point, but now it's D3 in this 10-point rubric. And this is the complexity point, okay? One thing I want to point out is I had several students email and say, hey, I usually put my complexity in the concluding paragraph. And you had seen in the structure that we built it as a separate body paragraph. One thing I want to point out of the rubric is the rubric does say that the complexity, this understanding must be part of the argument, not merely a phrase or reference. And so it's really hard for a reader if you're putting complexity, or your intention to put complexity is after you restate the thesis, because it sends a signal to the reader that I'm done arguing and then I'm just throwing this other thing in here. So we want to think about that part of the rubric where complexity is within the body of the argument, and it's got to be demonstrated that way. But here's a really good response from Sophie. Although European authorities exercise religious intolerance to keep their states uniform, so that was her main argument, some monarchs created peace by allowing a basic form of freedom of religion. In the Edict of Nantes, King Henry IV of France allowed Calvinists to practice their religion after a bloody civil war. The Edict of Nantes had the intent of keeping peace and stopping the war. The French Protestants were allowed to live in France without being inquired after, vexed, molested by this. But this was only true in 150 towns in France, so even this religious tolerance was restricted. Keep in mind, you're not seeing the entire essay. Sophie is explaining, the argument she's making is that they were not tolerant. And then in a separate body paragraph, she earns this complexity point because she's giving a nod to the other side and then even saying, even this is restricted. So that is, if you look at the bottom left, this is an alternative view of the evidence. That's how that earns that complexity point. And one more, please. This is from Katie at Lewisburg Area High School in Pennsylvania. This is really well done. It earns complexity in a couple ways. Again, this was a separate paragraph. While many European authorities did not exercise religious toleration, some rulers did choose to allow for religious toleration. For example, document 5 highlights the Edict of Nantes, in which Henry IV provided religious toleration to those residing in France. As the king, his audience is his entire country. This is important because it shows how one ruler choosing to allow for religious toleration affects an entire country. So she's going to earn the point right there just with that alone, because that's the alternative view, right? And again, she's making this counter argument. She also is going to earn a sourcing point for audience in there. But then here's another way that you can earn complexity. There are lots of ways to get at complexity. And in the blue, she writes, religious toleration was also shown in the Netherlands, where Luther traveled quickly to proclaim Lutheranism. While there was some resentment in the southern portions of the Netherlands, the northern portion quickly adapted to Lutheranism and respected it for its notion of predestination. So it's a connection within the time period that also could work. It could also work as a point for outside evidence if we didn't use that for, if she needed a point for outside evidence. We can't double dip, as you know, but this is a great example because we actually have done complexity twice in this example. So really well done, Katie from Lewisburg Area High School in Pennsylvania.
That's great. And, you know, Todd, I almost said when I was showing the outside evidence point that was referring to Elizabeth, that could have been developed into an argument about complexity. But as we were looking, it just was a quick mention after using that document. So it fit that outside evidence really well. So, there's these kids are finding a complex understanding of these documents in a lot of different ways. And we continue to be really impressed during this entire period. So we're going to head to the content of our lesson, and we're covering some remaining parts of Unit 1, and we're going to talk about the Columbian Exchange. So the Columbian Exchange refers to that exchange between Europe and the New World, the Old and New World, of plants, animals, and diseases. If you take a look at the picture on the right, that is an engraving of representing Columbus's landing on Hispaniola. And this is that's why the naming of the Columbian Exchange after Columbus. And we have the fact that these Europeans subjugate the native populations. And the key concept that's there in B is that this exchange the subjugation was facilitated by disease. We see smallpox in particular, as well as measles and the flu, that will ravage native populations who do not have the immunity that the Europeans have to these diseases. A very relevant thing to talk about today, right? Europeans brought familiar crops with them, and we have this rich exchange of foodstuffs. This will be a benefit to both cultures. Europeans return with very important crops that are going to set the foundation for central elements of European diets, particularly the potato and corn. We see that Europeans also bring with them domestic livestock, which allows for faster travel and facilitates the transport of heavier loads. And on the next slide, I'm not going to sit and read it to you, but you can always come back and have a quick look at it. Is this, I think every textbook has some version of this particular map with the exchange of things coming from Europe into North America, and then really thinking about the impact of the items that were brought back to Europe. And listed there on the left are the illustrative examples from the curriculum framework for AP Euro, so you can just have those key ideas of this exchange that took place. Along with this exchange, we're going to see the slave trade brought to the Americas. So in A, Europeans expanded the slave trade because of a plantation economy. It starts really with Charles V, who's the Holy Roman Emperor at the time, authorizing Spanish to bring enslaved Africans to the Americas. That picture that's on the right is one of many horrific representations of the Middle Passage, which is that voyage from across the Atlantic. And there's many depictions of the overcrowding that these slave ships had. We see that about 20% of the slaves died during the voyage due to a lack of sanitation, from dysentery, from contaminated food and water. And the slave traders were trying to maximize their profits, and then hence why hundreds of people are packed onto these ships. And what's really driving this at the beginning is the sugar that's being grown, particularly in the Caribbean. So we see that after Spain, we'll have Portuguese, Dutch, and English all begin the transport of slaves. Most of this is initially to work in the sugar plantations. And by 1875, it's estimated over 12 million enslaved Africans were brought to work not just in sugar, but plantations for cotton, rum, tobacco, wheat, and corn. So we see that map that I showed you of the Columbian Exchange. Most of you have probably seen the triangle trade map that adds the slave trade into this equation. So.
Okay, thank you, Katie. For our guided practice, we're going to work on sourcing and situation. So stay with us here, because I know distance learning, this is a very different medium for a lot of us. And we can't see you. You're looking at what we're presenting to you, but stay with us and let's think about sourcing, because we've got lots of points available in the rubric if we do sourcing correctly. Now, on 2B, you are to explain the historical situation, audience purpose, and or point of view of a source. That is what traditionally historians will just call sourcing. And we've been using the acronym HAP and adding a Y at the end, the H being for historical situation, the A for audience, the P for purpose, and the other P for point of view. And if we add the Y to the end, it helps remind us, why is this important? So if you are doing the historical situation, there's the example. The historical situation depicted in this image is, and you talk about that, this is especially important because that's the why. So if you're doing either the H, the A, the P, or the P, we always want to identify it, but then we have to explain, and that's what the why means. So if we take a look at this image and just think about our DBQ that we just wrote, this is a monk teaching at Salamanca University in Spain in the 16th century. Let's think, what do we already know about religion in Spain? What do we, can we project or can we speculate what might a monk be teaching about religion in Spain? Is it going to be tolerance, or is it the intolerance argument that you were trying to formulate through your DBQ? So even though we may not know anything else than what we see in the source line and what we see in the image, we're going to draw on the information we know about the context of the time. What do we know about Spain at the time? What do we know about what their position has been politically with the Reconquista, Ferdinand and Isabella expelling the Jews and expelling the Muslims? So we can put that together as we source it. And so we can say the historical situation, and then we can say this is important because, okay? So I just want to take you through that think activity, and you'll have a chance to do some more sourcing as homework later today. Okay, Katie? Oh, this is me, isn't it? Okay. The second part today is to talk about commercializing of agriculture and what we call estate agriculture. And really quickly, I want to bring your attention to the source on the right. This is one of my most favorite paintings. It's by Jean-Francois Millet. It is The Gleaners. It's so significant for a number of reasons, and you can someday we'll be able to go back out and into the world. And it's at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. One of the reasons this painting is so so great for its time is that it's a painting of just common people. These women are doing this backbreaking work. In the background, you can see it looks like the harvest is almost completed. There's these giant stacks of grain and straw that have been gone through. And these women then in the foreground, they are going through and picking up small, tiny kernels of what is left of the grain. And that gleaning of the grain is going to sustain them through the winter months. And it just demonstrates to you how difficult life was for the common people. So we get into the A paragraph, the open field system. The fields are open. The land was divided into several strips. There's no hedges or fences. And they would leave some of the fields for fallow. That is, that they would just let nothing, they wouldn't plant anything there. And that would regenerate the soil. B is kind of relating to the painting itself. There were traditional village rites. Open meadows were used for hay and animal pasture. Poor women could glean grain, and the woodlands were held in common for firewood, berries, and building materials, so that common people that don't own land can still go to these common areas and have the materials they need to get through the day, get through the winter, get through their lives. And C, the social conditions. The state and landlords levied heavy taxes and high rents. The peasants were worst off in Eastern Europe, where some had to work many days on the lord's land with no pay, and somewhat better off in Western Europe, where serfs could own their land and pass it on to their children. So we need to make sure that you see that distinction. Eastern Europe, serfdom still is very much a part of the lifestyle by this time. Western Europe, it is nearly non-existent serfs, but they do have peasants on the land. Next slide, please. And then we start to get into this commercialization of agriculture. I found this image for you on the right. It's a plan of a medieval manor. And you see the top, in kind of the top right, it says common pasture. It demonstrates for you, thank you, Katie, demonstrates for you that common pasture land where if they had peasants who had any type of livestock, could they let them roam there, then they could, that was help to sustain them through the winter months, okay? And if they wanted, they could also farm some things in this common lands. So we get to commercializing agriculture. Why is this shift occurring? So eliminating the fallow, that meant that alternating grain with nitrogen restoring crops, peas, beans, turnips, potatoes, which in turn meant better feed for animals, more fodder, hay, and root crops for the winter months, larger herds of cattle. So in other words, if we can capture what has been fallow land and start planting it, it will be better as the thinking, and that's what leads us into commercialization. And then how do we do that? We go through the enclosure movement. And this is where innovators are going to fence the individual shares of the common pasture land in order to farm more effectively And it comes at the expense of the poor peasants who relied on these common fields for farming and pasture. And in the C paragraph, we have poor rural people opposed enclosure because obviously it takes away from what they're accustomed to. In some countries, they found allies in nobility since they were weary of the financial costs of purchasing and enclosing land. However, the new and old systems stood side by side as late as the 19th century in some parts of Western Europe. And so it leads us into our last slide, which is going to be about estate agriculture. Next slide, please. So we're commercializing it. When the Dutch are kind of the leaders of this, they take the lead to drain marshes. One of the things about the Dutch is it's a densely populated country, meaning lots of people in a small area of land. And the Netherlands, also known as Holland or Hollow Land, is at or below sea level. So how to reclaim some of that land is through expensive draining of marshes and creating canals. So in B, the agricultural innovation in England, they are going to follow the Dutch example. They're going to drain some extensive wetlands or marshes in rainy England. The innovator Jethro Tull, who later, I always talk to students about the 70s rock band Jethro Tull, but the innovator Jethro Tull was an important English innovator, developed better farming methods. The seed drill was his big thing. By 1870, English farmers were producing 300% more food than they'd produced in 1700. So that means we have a lot more food available. It generally is going to mean you have a better fed and healthier population. And it also is going to mean we can sell that excess. So it leads us to C, the market-driven estate agriculture. A tiny minority of English and Scottish landholders held most of the land in England, and they would rely on a smaller number of landless laborers. There are people who labor on the land who do not own any land. In no other European country did proletarianization transform of large numbers of small peasants into landless rural wage earners go so far. So it's going to have some social impacts and consequences because of that, is just what you need to understand as we review this part of the history.
All right. So again, we went very, very quickly over the economic impact of colonial expansion. We talked about the slave trade and some very quick commercial and agricultural developments. Definitely covered development and processes, claims and evidence and sources there with that activity. And then we'll talk about your homework in a moment. And contextualization, also argumentation from the homework that you had. Again, thank you so much for continuing to share all these great examples with us. And I hope that you're appreciating the practice. We also did the development of causation here.
Okay, so for your exam practice, one thing we want to cue you in on is, we obviously can't, there were well over 100 people that submitted full DBQs. And so we obviously can't go over that, but we're showing you different parts. And so as we show you like the A sample for thesis and the B for contextualization, compare the sample that we're giving you with what you've written. Do you see similarities? Do you think you would be earning the point in there? So we'll try to get to as many samples as we can, but part of this is going to be on you to make sure you're looking, okay, that's what the sample says. How's that look in comparison to mine? So let's take a look at a little bit of practice. One of the things, and Katie mentioned it in one of her examples, is we really want you to start thinking also about attribution. So what that means is an in-text citation. So in B, this is part of learning to write well. It demonstrates to readers that you are considering the source as you analyze or hap the source. So what is attribution? In C, attribution is using the name of the author of a document or something about the source in the response. And so much of the information is provided to you in the source line. So introducing your sourcing or your use of the evidence is D. A sample stem you could use is according to, or the statement issued by, or the author's name shared by his, her, their perspective. So beginning with that, rather than saying source 2 or document 1, let's use the actual source line information to introduce. We call that attribution. And part of that is just learning how to be a good writer. Yes, we are writing to a task in this essay, but we want to transfer those skills and be good writers at whatever we do. So here's your homework. Write a paragraph where you introduce the source using attribution and then explain the historical situation, audience, purpose, or point of view of the document. And so the source we've given you is, we've gone back a bit here from the 2000 AP European History exam. And I picked this source. It was at the time document 10, because I think it kind of relates a little bit to what we were just talking about in this last DBQ. So the source is a Russian official report on an incident in a village in Novgorod province, Russia, late 19th century. I'm not going to read it for you. You have it there. But what we want you to do is E. The homework is to write a paragraph. You introduce the source using attribution. Then you source that document. Okay. And you can turn that response into apvirtuallearning@gmail.com. Please include your first name, school, state, or country. And we will show some of those tomorrow as we do our warm-up tomorrow. Here's just a quick note from College Board. We know that not all students have access to the internet or a device. We're working on solutions to help students get what they need to show their best work. If you need mobile tools or connectivity or know someone who does, reach out to College Board directly at cb.org/tech.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Todd. I'm glad you said that at the end about the attribution. It is really a good best practice to get in the habit of using that rich source information to refer to the document. So I thought that was great. Have a great
day. It is,
day.
and know that the skills you're trying to learn, they need to be transferable, right? We're not just learning this for this task this time. We want to learn these skills for things that we have in front of us for our education later. And so knowing the source, handling the source, that's a good practice to do.
Absolutely. Hope everyone has a great day, and we look forward to seeing your responses so we can showcase them tomorrow. Take care.
See you guys. Thanks for watching.